In his only second ever Oval Office address, President Joe Biden, speaking there from the heart, arguing that we cannot turn our backs on the wars in Israel and Ukraine and our friends and allies there, arguing that we must protect our democratic allies. This inflection point for America, as he described it last night, could determine our future for decades to come. His message ringing out loud and clear that we cannot let hate and evil win, arguing that we must stand against terrorism and division abroad and right here at home. President Biden's address coming one day before the momentous breaking news we've been covering since we've been on the air. News that 2 hostages, Americans, were released from Gaza today after being held by Hamas terrorists for nearly 2 weeks. Judith Tai Renan and Natalie Shoshana Renan from Evanston, Illinois, were kidnapped during the October 7th terror attack and are now back in Israel being reunited with family members. Just in the last few minutes, President Biden spoke with the Renan family from the Oval Office. And last hour, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has repeatedly called out Hamas's reliance on humans as shields, spoke about the horrors felt by the families and loved ones of those taken.
When I was in Israel last week, I met with the families of U.S. citizens that Hamas has taken hostage. President Biden, too, had the opportunity to hear directly from the families. It's impossible to adequately put into words the agony they're feeling of not knowing the fate of their loved ones, worrying relentlessly about them, for their safety, for their security, for their well-being. No family anywhere should have to experience this torture.
In a press conference in Israel, a spokesperson for the IDF sought to remind the world not to be tricked by today's move, arguing that while Hamas presents the hostage release as a humanitarian gesture, in reality, what we're dealing with is a murderous terrorist organization. While the release is welcome news, of course, to everybody, especially to the family members and loved ones of Judith and Natalie, there are still many, many more hostages who remain in Gaza, including 10 other Americans, who President Biden acknowledged in a statement this afternoon. Quote, as I told those families of the Americans held hostage when I spoke with them last week, we will not stop until we get their loved ones home. As president, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans held hostage all around the world. That's where we begin the hour with our special guest, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, live with us outside the White House. I know it's been a whirlwind, but let's start with the release of the hostages. When did the president and you first learn that they would be released?
Well, we've been working on this actually for quite some time, and I think everything really kind of came together this morning in the early hours of the day, and then, of course, we were watching this closely throughout the afternoon. We didn't really get the final good news. We, it kind of happened in stages where we knew, Nicole, that they had been transferred to the Red Cross, and then, of course, it was about getting them out of Gaza. Even though they were with the Red Cross, we couldn't really talk about it until they got safely into Israel. So all that kind of transpired literally in just the last few hours.
Is there anything new on how they're doing physically or emotionally?
They're, as far as we know, they're being evaluated as we speak by Israeli medical health professionals. I have not seen any definitive word about their health, and of course, I'd want to be careful anyway in respecting their privacy. But I do know that they are getting appropriate medical care now.
So, John, my colleague, Raf Sanchez, a tremendous reporter covering the terrorist attack and everything that happened before and since in Israel, described the release today as a, quote, carefully choreographed PR move by the terror organization of Hamas, and said in some ways it's a rebuke of President Biden's address, which was strong and forceful and obviously condemned the terrorist acts of October 7th. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I don't. I think this is something that the president has been laser focused on since the first time we heard that there were American hostages being held by Hamas. We said then, and we're still saying, because we think there's additional Americans being held hostage, we're going to do everything we can to get them back with their families. This was the result of a lot of hard work, through support of partners in the region. We make no apologies for that. And we also have been very, very clear, and I think, you saw when the president was in Tel Aviv, we continue to stand with the people of Israel as they defend themselves against these terrorists. We're going to make sure that they continue to have the tools and weapons that they need to go after Hamas.
Frank Figliuzzi, a former senior FBI official, said this about the move. He said terrorists don't release hostages as a goodwill gesture. How do you feel about that?
I think it's probably best for me to be careful about what I say in terms of how we got these two Americans out, because there are additional hostages we want to see released. And the less we say about the process that was utilized, probably the better.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today thanked Qatar. Was careful the same way you're trying to be of not saying too much, but thanked Qatar for their role. New York Times reporter Adam Goldman and some of his colleagues have reported on their role and their expertise in this area. Is there anything you can add other than what the Secretary of State said?
No, I think it's probably better, again, that we don't go too much into the kinds of communications, the kind of negotiations that went into getting these Americans back. But as you saw in the president's statement, Qatar played a role. We're grateful for that role that they played. I think it's common knowledge that Qatar does have an open line of communication with Hamas, and I think I'll leave it at that. Let's
turn to the president's address last night. I know it's been a whirlwind of a I guess it's more than 12 hours by now. We're going on about 17. The president, I think, well, the president earned high praise from Brit Hume over at Fox News, who had some glowing words to say about it. I wonder if there's any surprise on the part of the communications staff to how well received the address was. Well, we were very glad to see that, and we're glad to see the terrific response that the president's remarks have had, not just here at home, but around the world as well. It was very important for the president to make clear to the American people not only why we need this supplemental funding. I mean, that was obviously a part of the speech, but really making the case for why it's in our national security interest to continue to support our partners in Ukraine and Israel, because what happens there doesn't just stay there. It does affect the safety and security of the American people abroad and here at home. And I think he made a very, very compelling case for that. What the president seemed to be intent on was, you know, there were three legs to the stool, if you will, talking about the terrorist attack in Israel, bringing back into focus the plight of our Ukrainian allies, and then really spending a lot of time on hate here at home, the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Can you talk about the importance of trying to put all three of those out there before the country? Oh, well, I mean, it kind of goes to what I was saying before about the effect of these wars on the safety and security of the American people. There's a lot that goes into that. And part of it is the potential threat for domestic violence here at home as a spillover effect from particularly what's going on between Israel and Hamas. I mean, we've already seen, you know, unfortunately, anti-Semitic language, rhetoric, and potential violence here at home. And it's been on the rise. We want to make sure that the Jewish community, as well as the Muslim community here in the United States, understands that hate is not appropriate. Hateful violence is obviously going to be dealt with severely and appropriately, and that the federal government is working with state and local governments to better identify any kind of threats and disrupt them before they happen. We're laser focused on this, and the president, I mean, only a matter of a couple of days after Hamas attacked on October 7th, started to put in motion that process and those procedures so that the federal government could be much more involved at a local level. How did the trip to Israel impact the way that, and the people he met with, the Israeli citizens he met with, how did that impact his thinking on this? It was a dramatic moment for him to be able to spend some time, as he did, just kind of soaking in their presence and listening to their stories. First responders and families that have lost loved ones and are grieving, and families that are just suffering the anxiety and the uncertainty of not knowing where their loved ones are. Some of them know that their family members are hostages, but they haven't been able to connect or contact them. I mean, it's just, the anguish was just palpable, and you could feel it in the room. And of course, the president really wanted to take time to soak in that with them and to make sure that they knew how dedicated he was to doing everything we can to get those loved ones back home, but also to continue to support Israel. And I think, as is the case with Joe Biden, I mean, those kind of moments definitely inform everything he says and does after those moments. And certainly they were top of his mind as he gave that speech last night. The Secretary of State and the President have been abundantly clear that in this syncing up, standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel, they have used those ties to fight for aid and relief for the innocent Palestinians. I noted that Secretary of State Blinken and the president always seem to make an effort to try to educate people that it is Hamas who use innocent civilians as human shields. Talk about that a little bit.
It's important for people to remember what Hamas is. This is a terrorist organization. It's not a state. It's not a government. Though they believe that they are, in terms of governance of Gaza, they are a terrorist organization. They don't abide by the laws of war like Israel does or the United States does, or two democracies. And they are victimizing the Palestinian people in Gaza in ways that I don't think is still fully appreciated. They're the ones using them as human shields. They're telling them not to leave their homes, not to try to get out of the country, and in some cases preventing or trying to prevent their movement, putting tunnels underneath their homes, headquartering their command and control centers in hospitals and schools, deliberately placing the Palestinian people in greater danger. And I think that's important for people to remember. The Palestinian people in Gaza, they're not represented by Hamas. Hamas doesn't represent their hopes and aspirations for justice and security and an independent state. And I just think it's important to continue to remind people of that.